The folder hit the floor before I could stop it. Papers sliding everywhere while my heart started racing for no clear reason. Then I heard my name through the boardroom door, low and sharp, followed by a chair scraping like someone had just stood up fast. And something in my chest told me I wasn't supposed to hear what came next. I froze there, crouched on the carpet pretending to gather papers while my ears caught fragments of voices. That didn't sound friendly. One of them said, "She doesn't need to know yet." And another voice, calm but cold, replied, "No. We move forward without her." And that was the moment I realized something was already happening behind my back. If you enjoy real Reddit stories that slowly turn into something way deeper than expected, hit the subscribe button right now, because this one didn't just change my career. It changed how I trust people completely. And trust me, what happened after this moment is something I still think about late at night. My name is Meita Naga. I was 29 at the time, and for 6 years I worked at a company called Kestrel Pacific Group, where I handled all their Japanese partnerships. That sounds simple, but in reality, I was the bridge between two completely different business worlds, translating not just language, but meaning, tone, and trust. I grew up in a mixed household, my mom Japanese, my dad from New Zealand, and from a young age I learned that silence can say more than words. I didn't just learn Japanese, I learned how people think, how they hesitate, how they disagree without ever saying no directly. By the time I joined Kestrel, I wasn't just fluent. I understood the culture in a way that takes years to build. And over those 6 years, I helped close deals that people above me took credit for. Because that's how corporate life works sometimes. But the deal that changed everything wasn't just another project. It was massive. The kind that could define a company's future. We were working with a major Japanese infrastructure group. And after more than a year of careful communication, we were finally close to signing. Every detail mattered, every pause, every word choice, every dinner conversation that didn't even mention business, but built something more important. That's how trust works in Japan. It's not fast, and it's definitely not loud. Then Brett Calloway arrived. He was confident, sharp, and completely unaware of what he didn't understand. Within days, he started changing things, shortening meetings, simplifying processes, turning something delicate into something rushed. I tried to explain, carefully at first, then more directly, that the structure we had wasn't random. It was intentional. But every time I spoke, he smiled like I was overcomplicating something simple. And then 9 days before the final trip to Tokyo, he called me into his office. He had a printed chart on the table with my role highlighted in red, and before I even sat down, I already knew. He said my position was being restructured, that my responsibilities would be redistributed, and that it wasn't personal. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there, feeling that strange quiet you feel when something unfair happens, but you're too shocked to react. Then I asked one question. "Is this effective immediately?" He said yes. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out with my bag, leaving behind 6 years of work like it meant nothing. But here's the part that made this story different. There was something in that contract, something very specific, a clause about continuity, about keeping the same liaison throughout the process. It had been added because trust had been built slowly, carefully, and replacing that person wasn't just a change. It was a signal. I didn't tell Brett, not because I was planning anything, but because in that moment, I realized something simple. If someone doesn't value what you bring, explaining it rarely changes their mind. So I left, and the next day, I accepted a job offer from another firm that had quietly reached out weeks earlier. I thought that was the end of the story, but it wasn't even close. Because 4 days later, I got a message from a former colleague that simply said, something went wrong in Tokyo. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just minor issues. But then another message came, then another, each one more urgent than the last. The dinner had been quiet, too quiet. The client had asked where I was, and when they were told I was gone, something changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that anyone who understood would have noticed. The next day during the meeting, questions were asked that weren't really questions. Signals were sent that weren't understood, and slowly, carefully, the deal started slipping away. By midday, the room had shifted completely. By afternoon, the meeting was paused, and by the next morning, the entire deal was effectively dead. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. If you've ever watched something fall apart because someone underestimated what you do, comment "I've seen this before," because this kind of thing happens more than people admit. 3 days later, I got a call from the CEO. He asked if I could come back, even temporarily, even as a consultant, to fix the situation. For a moment, I just stood there holding my phone, remembering the way I was let go like I didn't matter. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. They didn't lose the deal because I left. They lost it because they never understood why I mattered in the first place. I told him I had already joined another firm. There was silence on the line, and in that silence, everything that needed to be understood finally was. If you're still watching, hit the like button, because the second half of this story is where everything comes full circle in a way you won't expect. The line went quiet after I told him I had already moved on, and for a moment, I could almost hear the weight of that realization settling in on the other end. He cleared his throat, tried to keep his tone professional, and asked if there was any possible way I could still assist informally, even just to clarify a few cultural nuances for their team. I paused, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully, the same way I had done in every high-stakes conversation for the last 6 years. And I told him that I couldn't, not because I didn't want to help, but because I respected the role I had stepped into at my new company. He understood immediately, or at least he said he did. And after a brief exchange of polite closing remarks, the call ended in a way that felt both final and strangely calm. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear. Like a fog had lifted and everything was finally exactly where it was supposed to be. That night, I sat at my new desk long after everyone else had left, looking out at the city lights and realizing that sometimes losing something is the only way you see its true value. Over the next few weeks, more details about what happened in Tokyo started to reach me, not through gossip, but through the quiet, professional network that exists behind the scenes in industries like this. The interpreter they hired had translated every word correctly, but none of the meaning. And in Japanese business culture, that difference is everything. Questions that were meant to signal concern were treated like minor clarifications. Pauses that indicated hesitation were rushed past, and the subtle shift in tone that should have stopped the entire conversation went completely unnoticed. By the time Kobayashi-san requested that break halfway through the meeting, the outcome had already been decided. It just hadn't been spoken out loud yet. And when his team didn't return after lunch, it wasn't confusion or scheduling issues. It was a decision, one made quietly, respectfully, and permanently. The official letter that arrived the next morning used polite language, referencing contract clauses and continuity concerns. But anyone who understood that style of communication knew exactly what it meant. The deal wasn't paused. It was over. 14 months of work, countless hours of preparation, and a relationship built slowly over years had been undone in less than a day. Not because of bad intentions, but because of a simple, critical mistake, assuming that expertise could be replaced instantly. If this story is hitting you in a way that feels familiar, drop a comment that says they underestimated me, because that moment, when someone fails to see your value, is something a lot of people carry quietly. About 2 months later, I heard that Brett's role had been restructured. the same word he had used when letting me go. And I remember staring at that message longer than I expected to. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just leaned back in my chair and felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but a kind of quiet closure. Because the truth is, watching someone face the consequences of their own decisions doesn't feel as powerful as you think it will. It just feels complete. At Nakamura, things were different from the very beginning, not just in title or salary, but in respect. I wasn't asked to prove my value constantly. I was trusted to use it. And that changes the way you show up every single day. Within my first 3 months, I was already working on projects that required the same depth of understanding I had built over years, but this time, people listened when I spoke. One of those projects eventually led me back into conversations with people connected to the same network as before, including, unexpectedly, Kobayashi-san himself. The first message I received from him after everything happened was short, formal, and carefully worded, but it carried something deeper beneath the surface. He acknowledged the change in my position, expressed hope for my continued success, and ended with a line that translated roughly to, trust, once built with care, does not disappear. It simply waits for the right place to continue. I read that message more than once, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Over time, our communication resumed in small, professional ways, nothing dramatic, just occasional updates, brief exchanges, the kind that reflect mutual respect rather than obligation. And eventually, that connection led to something new. A partnership opportunity with another firm that had been quietly recommended through his network. That deal didn't happen quickly either. It took time, patience, and the same careful attention to detail that had once been dismissed as unnecessary. But when it was finally signed, it wasn't just another contract. It was proof of something much bigger. That real relationships outlast bad decisions. If you've made it this far into the story, I want to say thank you, because stories like this aren't just about work or revenge. They're about understanding your own worth when other people fail to see it. And if you believe more people need to hear that, hit the like button so this reaches someone who might be going through the same thing right now. Looking back, I've thought a lot about that moment when I walked out of Kestrel with my bag, wondering if I should have said more, explained more, fought harder to prove what I knew. But the truth is, none of that would have changed the outcome, because the problem was never a lack of information. It was a lack of understanding. And you can't force someone to understand something they've already decided isn't important. What you can do is recognize your value, protect it, and take it somewhere it will be seen, respected, and allowed to grow. That's what I did, not as a strategy, not as revenge, but as a choice to stop staying where I wasn't valued. Sometimes people think revenge has to be loud, dramatic, or visible to feel real. But the most powerful kind of revenge is the one where you simply move forward, build something better, and let time reveal what others failed to see. So here's what I want to ask you before this video ends. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew your value, but someone else didn't, and it cost them more than they realized? Tell me your story in the comments, because someone reading it might finally understand their own situation a little more clearly. And if you want more real stories like this, where things don't just end, they come back around in unexpected ways, make sure you subscribe and be part of this community.